You asked for it, you got it. Here's my little fret radiusing jig. Now, it's made out of scrap 3/4 inch ply, furniture grade ply, so it starts out nice and flat to begin with. I'm going to go ahead and measure it from inside to inside for you here. This one is 30 3/4 of an inch. It just barely fits the length of my sanding belt here. It's, let's see, it's 8 inches deep right here. That probably has more to do with the size of the material I had when I made it than anything else. And then it has these ends over here that are 5 inches on the outside. That would be 4 1/4 on the inside. I'm going to go ahead, it's a little closer so you can see it. There you go. So this right here is almost unimportant to mention, that 4 1/4 inches right there. But this piece down here is 1.5 inches tall. And that's what the little brass dowels that are on this part are going to ride on. I'll show you that in a minute. So that's 1.5 inches tall, and it's 1/2 inch thick. This, measured on the inside, is 1 inch right here, this little flange that's sitting out here. So that means you've got an additional 1/2 inch that's over here. That works perfectly with my little 1/2 inch thick cauls, which then ride along here and rock. Let me see if I can show that a little bit better. Rock back and forth on the back side of this. So here's the jig that holds the fretboard on. We'll talk about the vacuum stuff in a minute here. On the end here I've got 2 brass dowels. There's similar brass dowels on the other end, and they're all based off the center line of the board. This is a nice dry piece of redwood, really stable. It's keeping its shape. I've also lacquered it too, both to protect it and to give it a little better chance of the vacuum holding. Now these 2 brass pins here I've got set at about 1.25 inches apart from each other. That dimension isn't critical, but you want to have a wide enough stance with the little cauls that you put on that it holds it sturdy. These happen to be about 1 3/16 inches back from this face, and again that'll have to do with how big of a caul that you make, but you make some consistent holes in a piece of maple or whatever you use for your caul, and we'll talk about how to make those in a little bit, and they just slide on. Now you'll notice that this says, this particular one says 17 net, 16 1/4 act, and I meant actual. This is a 16 1/4 inch radius, and the reason for that is that it's about, by the time I've got this cut, it's 1/2 inch from the face of the board to the face of this caul, and then about another 1/4 inch for the thickness of the fretboard. Now this is going to go ahead and ride, the brass dowel is going to sit on top of this board here. There's a similar one at the other end. And then the caul, let's see if I've got another caul, will be riding alongside and doing the little rocking action. I'm going to go ahead and pull this over so you can see it from the other side. So this would be the view from the sanding face, and you can see this comes out almost flush right here. If I had a fretboard on here, that 3/4 inch difference, if I hold this 1/4 inch away from the sanding belt, then I'll be exactly where I want to be. So that's why the difference between the actual and the net on this sanding caul. So this is the face of my sanding caul. This center section here takes care of your standard scale of fretboard for a regular guitar, and the pieces on each end are for when I'm doing longer scale instruments like basses or banjos or something like that. There's just simply a hole here in the center, I'll come a little bit closer, that is hooked up to a little plastic barbed fitting on the back side, and the other complications here are just for when I'm working with the other 2 vacuum sections. The neoprene is just a hair above the surface of the redwood. I had to do a little bit of experimenting here so that this stuff wouldn't fold over and get trapped between the redwood and the fretboard. You want to make sure that it's pulling the fretboard down tight to the wood and not being interfered with by your gasket. To that end, this is a 3/8 inch gasket that's set into a 1/2 inch groove here. Now, I could have put little channels all the way through here to help distribute the vacuum. Turns out I don't need to. I've just got this one little section right here that then travels around the inside groove here. I mitered the edges together and then glued them and tried to seal them. Did so-so of a job, but the vacuum pump is more than enough to take care of what I need there. To set this up on the sander, I would have a fretboard on here. I don't at this point, but I would have a fretboard on there secured with a vacuum, and I would go ahead and just push both of the cauls up tight against their fences in the front, and then I would move the whole assembly right up against the sanding belt in a static position, of course, and make sure that everything was lined up and flat. And then I'd go ahead and grab my clamps, clamp this down, do one on the other end, and when I'm happy with that, grab a little piece of blue tape. I'll go ahead and just tape that right down to the table there. Tape it right down to the table on this end too. And that gives me an indication of where I've started. Go ahead and do some sanding, and if I've got a flat spot in the middle, or if it's nice and round but I still feel like I want to take a little bit more off of the fretboard, I now have an indication. I can go ahead and just give that a little 1/16 of an inch bump there, 32nd, whatever it is I want to do, and sand again. To make accurate cauls, all you need is a scrap piece of plywood and drill 2 corresponding dowels into the piece that your caul will fit on. Slide it over there, and then if you had another piece of scrap plywood on here that you could drill into, you can measure back from the face of where your caul is to the radius you want. Go ahead and do your sanding. If you want a bigger radius, you move it back here. If you want a smaller one, you move it up there, and just make sure that you keep a nice center line on everything that you do. Now let's see what you come up with.